Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. I don't know why I agreed to go back there. Whispering Pines was the kind of place that made you feel watched, even when you were alone. But when Mia and Lucas insisted on exploring the old trail, I didn't want to seem like a coward. I should have trusted my instincts. We arrived at the trail just before sunset, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. At the entrance stood an old metal gate, its hinges rusted and bent out of shape. A faded sign hung crookedly, the words barely legible. "Do not enter after dark." "Probably just to scare people off," Lucas said, grinning. He pushed the gate open with a screech that echoed through the still forest. The sound made me shiver. The trail was overgrown, with tree roots snaking across the path like veins. It didn't feel right. The forest was silent. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of our boots on the damp earth. And then, faintly, I heard it, a whisper. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a murmur. Mia stopped. "Hear what?" I strained to listen. It wasn't the wind. It was low and soft, like someone murmuring just out of reach. I shook my head, brushing it off, but my unease only grew. The deeper we ventured, the darker it became, and soon the path behind us seemed to vanish, swallowed by the forest. "This is crazy," Mia said, her voice trembling. "It feels like we're walking in circles." "Just keep going," Lucas replied, though his usual confidence sounded forced. Then we saw it, a tree unlike the others. Its bark was blackened, almost charred, and deep carvings spiraled up its trunk. They didn't look random, they looked deliberate. Symbols. Warnings, maybe. "Let's turn back," Mia said. But when we turned around, the path was gone. "What the hell?" Lucas whispered, spinning in circles. The trees were so dense now that the way we'd come from was indistinguishable from the rest of the forest. That's when the whispers came back, louder this time. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Words I couldn't understand, layered on top of each other like a chant. My chest tightened. "Run!" I shouted. We ran blindly through the woods, ducking under branches and leaping over roots. The whispers followed us, growing louder and sharper. I dared to glance back and saw shadows moving, twisting shapes that didn't belong to any person or animal. Lucas tripped first. I turned to help him, but the ground beneath him seemed to shift. It wasn't soil, it was something else. Dark, oozing alive. It clung to him like tar, pulling him down. His screams were muffled as the shadows closed in. Mia grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Don't stop," she cried. We sprinted until we reached a clearing. But when I turned to look for Mia, she wasn't there. I was alone. The forest was silent again, but the air felt heavier, charged. I stumbled into the center of the clearing, gasping for breath. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the distance. It wasn't human. Its form flickered, shifting between shadow and substance, and its eyes, if they were eyes, burned with a cold, pale light. The whispers surged, filling my head, my chest, every part of me. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The figure raised a hand, or what looked like one, and everything went black. They found me at the edge of the forest the next morning, curled up and barely conscious. No one found Mia or Lucas. They called it a tragedy, an accident. But I know the truth. In my dreams, I still hear the whispers. They call my name, and deep down, I know I was never meant to leave that forest. I don't know why I agreed to it. Looking back, it was one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made. But peer pressure is a powerful thing, especially when you're young and scared your friends will make fun of you for being a coward. That's how I ended up inside that cursed house. If I'd known what was going to happen, I never would have taken a single step inside. Let me start from the beginning. I live with my older brother in a quiet countryside village in the UK. Life here is peaceful most of the time, just fields, forests, and small neighborhoods. About 5 weeks ago, my friends and I were playing football in a clearing deep in the woods, about a 25-minute walk from my house. We'd been there for about an hour when the sun started to set. The shadows in the forest grew longer, and the temperature began to drop. None of us wanted to get caught out there after dark, so we decided to pack up and head home. We were maybe 10 minutes into the walk back when one of my friends, Lewis, noticed something up ahead. "Hey, look at that," he said, pointing. Through the trees, we saw the outline of an old, decaying house. Its windows were shattered, the roof was partially caved in, and ivy crawled up the crumbling brick walls. It looked like the kind of place kids would dare each other to go into. And that's exactly what Lewis did. "I dare you to go inside," he said with a mischievous grin. "Hell no," I shot back immediately. "No way am I going in there." Lewis wasn't the type to give up easily. He started pestering me, taunting me about how scared I was. When that didn't work, he played dirty. "Fine," he said. "But if you don't do it, I'm telling your brother about the window you broke last week." That got my attention. For days earlier, I'd accidentally shattered one of the windows in our living room while messing around with a football. I hadn't told my brother yet because, well, he doesn't exactly have a forgiving temper. If Lewis told him, I'd be in for it. "Fine," I said, groaning. "I'll go, but you're coming with me." "I'm not doing it alone." Lewis hesitated, but after a bit of arguing, he reluctantly agreed. Together, we made our way toward the house while our other friends stayed back, watching from the edge of the woods. As we got closer, the house looked even worse than I'd thought. The wooden front door was hanging off its hinges, and the whole place seemed to lean slightly to one side. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the house itself was sucking the warmth out of the atmosphere. When we reached the front door, we heard a faint creaking sound from inside. Lewis froze, and so did I. "Probably just the wind," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. We tried the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It was barricaded from the inside. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. "Guess we can't go in," I said quickly, already turning to leave. But Lewis wasn't about to let me off the hook. "Let's check the back," he said. Reluctantly, I followed him around to the rear of the house. The back door was ajar, hanging loosely on its rusted hinges. It looked like someone had forced it open. "You go first," Lewis said, giving me a nudge. I wanted to turn back so badly, but his taunts and threats were still fresh in my mind. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. The floorboards creaked under our weight as we moved cautiously through the first room. It looked like an old dining room, with a long, dusty table in the center and a few chairs tipped over on the floor. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but it was clear that people had been here before. Graffiti covered the walls, and empty beer bottles were scattered everywhere. "See," I whispered to Lewis. "It's just an old house. Nothing to be scared of." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. The silence in the house was absolute. No birds, no wind, no distant sounds from the forest outside. Just the faint creaks of the floorboards as we moved. We decided to check upstairs, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. The staircase was narrow and steep, the wood rotted and unstable. "Be careful," I warned Lewis as we started to climb. About halfway up, we heard it, a noise from above. It wasn't the house settling or the wind. It was something moving. A faint shuffling sound, like footsteps on the floorboards. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Yeah," Lewis whispered back. "Probably just an animal or something." But I didn't believe him. The sound was too deliberate, too human. "Let's just go a little further," he said. "Then we'll leave." Reluctantly, I kept climbing. But before we could reach the top, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It was loud, sharp, and filled with pain echoing through the house. "What the hell was that?" Lewis hissed, his face pale. Before I could answer, we heard a door upstairs slam open, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps running toward the stairs. "Run!" I shouted, turning and bolting back down the staircase. Lewis was right behind me. The stairs groaned and creaked under our weight, threatening to give way, but we didn't stop. We sprinted out of the house and didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods where our friends were waiting. "What happened?" one of them asked, but I couldn't even catch my breath to answer. We ran all the way back to my house and locked ourselves in my room. Neither of us could explain what we'd just experienced. We sat there in stunned silence for what felt like hours, too shaken to do anything. Eventually, we turned on the Xbox and played Warzone, trying to distract ourselves. But even as I focused on the game, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out of that house. That night, I barely slept. My dreams were filled with that scream and the sound of footsteps chasing us. When I woke up, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The next morning, my brother told me something strange. He said he'd seen a dark figure standing in our backyard near the shed. When we went outside to check, we found the shed's door smashed to pieces, but nothing was missing. Later that day, we heard that the abandoned house had burned to the ground. The police were investigating, but they thought it was probably just vandals or squatters. I wasn't so sure. Whatever was in that house, it wasn't human. I don't know what we saw that night, but I do know one thing. I'm never going into an abandoned house again. If you ever get that gut feeling that something isn't right, trust it. Don't let anyone pressure you into doing something stupid. It's not worth it. Last Christmas, my fiancée, Lila, and I decided to spend the holidays at her parents' house deep in the snowy wilderness of Vermont. Lila's parents owned a charming log cabin nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The area, aptly named Winter Hollow, was renowned for its picturesque winters, with heavy snow blanketing the landscape and turning it into something out of a Christmas card. For me, growing up in Louisiana, Christmas had always meant humid air and fake snow decorations. I was excited to finally experience a real Christmas with Lila's family. Snowball fights, cozy fireplaces, and the crunch of fresh snow under my boots. So we packed up the Jeep and started our drive on the night of December 22nd. The drive was long, winding, and mostly uneventful, with the occasional coffee stop to keep us awake. By the morning of Christmas Eve, we finally pulled into Winter Hollow. The cabin was everything Lila had described: warm, rustic, and bustling with activity. Inside, her parents, Harold and Sylvia, greeted us with hugs and steaming mugs of hot cocoa. Her younger brother, Jamie, who still lived at home, was already trying to wrangle a pair of snowshoes for the next day's hike. Lila's older sister, Emily, was there too, along with her husband, Owen, and their energetic golden retriever, Scout. Emily and Owen's 3 kids, twins Noah and Ellie, and their younger brother, Max, were practically vibrating with excitement over the holiday. After unpacking and settling in, we spent the day skiing and meeting up with Lila's cousin Mia and her family. The kids hit it off immediately and were thrilled about having a sleepover back at the cabin. By the time we returned home, the sun was already setting, casting a soft pink glow across the snow-covered clearing. That evening, after dinner, the kids, Jamie, Lila, and I played Mario Kart in the den while Harold stoked the fire and Sylvia prepared snacks. Everything felt perfect, like a snapshot of what the holidays should be. But then, things started to take a strange turn. It began with Scout, the usually cheerful golden retriever, growling at the back door. His ears were pinned back, his body tense as he stared at the curtain-covered window. "What's gotten into him?" Owen asked, trying to calm Scout down. Before anyone could answer, Harold muted the TV and motioned for us to be quiet. In the sudden silence, we heard it, faint, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow outside. Sylvia's face paled as she whispered, "We've been hearing those footsteps for weeks now. Always late at night. But with all the snow covering up tracks by morning, we figured it was just deer or something passing through." The kids were wide-eyed, clinging to Lila and Emily. I wanted to believe Sylvia's explanation, but something about the sound of those footsteps felt too precise, too human. After a tense moment, the footsteps faded, and we tried to shake off the unease. The kids eventually went to bed in the den while the adults stayed up for a bit, chatting and watching Home Alone. But even as we laughed at Kevin's hijinks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there watching. Around 1:30 a.m., we were all jolted awake by a piercing scream from the den. Lila and I bolted upstairs to find the kids huddled together, crying. "What happened?" Lila asked, pulling them into her arms. Noah, the oldest, was trembling as he pointed to the window. There was a man," he stammered. "What man?" Harold demanded, grabbing a flashlight. Noah swallowed hard. He was standing right outside the window, staring at us. He had a big beard. And an axe. My blood ran cold. Lila pulled the curtains back to look, but the only thing visible was a layer of frost on the glass. Harold and Jamie grabbed the shotgun and rifle they kept in the hall closet, and I grabbed a heavy flashlight to join them outside. In the snow by the back window, we found footprints, large, heavy boot prints that stopped right beneath the window and led toward the tree line. The man had been there. We searched the perimeter, our breath visible in the freezing air, but the tracks vanished into the dense forest. Whoever he was gone. Back inside, we double-checked every lock and made a plan to keep watch for the rest of the night. The kids slept in the master bedroom with Sylvia and Emily, while Harold, Jamie, and I stayed downstairs. I kept one eye on the front door and the other on the flickering fire, but the night passed without incident. The next morning, Harold asked me and Owen to return a chainsaw he'd borrowed from a neighbor, the Kendricks, who lived about a mile down the road. We loaded it into the Jeep and drove over, but as soon as we arrived, something felt off. The Kendricks' house was eerily quiet, their driveway covered in fresh snow with no tire tracks. A foul metallic smell hung in the air, making me gag. "They're probably just out," Owen said, though his voice wavered. We knocked on the door, but no one answered. When Owen tried the handle, the door swung open. Inside, the house was cold and dark. The smell was even stronger here, making my stomach churn. "We should leave," I whispered, but Owen was already calling out. "Mr. Kendrick? Mrs. Kendrick?" No reply. We stepped cautiously inside, our boots crunching on broken glass scattered across the floor. The smell grew unbearable as we climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. When we pushed the door open, we both froze. Two bodies lay on the floor, their skin gray and waxy. Mr. Kendrick had a knife protruding from his eye, and Mrs. Kendrick's throat was slashed. Blood had soaked into the carpet, long dried. Before we could react, we heard the faint crunch of footsteps outside. "He's here," I whispered. Owen and I bolted downstairs, slipping on the icy steps in our panic. We sprinted into the woods, the sound of footsteps growing louder behind us. When we finally reached the cabin, we locked the doors and windows, telling everyone what we'd seen. Sylvia began packing bags for the kids while I called the police. As I hung up, I glanced out the window and saw him, a tall, bearded figure standing at the edge of the trees, an axe glinting in his hand. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they searched the area, he was gone. One officer confirmed our worst fear. The man matched the description of a serial killer known as the Woodsman, responsible for multiple murders in isolated areas. With our car tires slashed, we had no choice but to accept the police escort into town. We spent Christmas Day in a cramped motel, too shaken to celebrate. The Kendricks' deaths made the news, but the Woodsman was never caught. Lila's parents sold the cabin shortly after, vowing never to return to Winter Hollow. Even now, I can't hear the crunch of snow without feeling a chill down my spine. I grew up in Orrville, Ohio, a small, quiet town where everyone knows everyone, and there's not much to do. My best friend, Caleb, and I would spend most of our free time playing basketball at the courts across town. The courts were our escape, but the problem was they were on the opposite side of Orrville from where we lived. Being teenagers, we didn't mind walking, and over time, we found shortcuts to save time. The best shortcut, by far, cut through an old train yard and a patch of forest. It was a little sketchy, sure, but it saved us at least 20 minutes. Plus, it had this kind of quiet, eerie charm to it. Old train cars rusting away, trees creaking in the wind. We got so used to it that it became second nature to take that route, even when the sun started to set. At least, it was second nature until last summer. It was the 4th of July, and Caleb and I were walking through the shortcut as usual, heading to the courts before dark. The train yard was empty, as always, and the forest loomed quietly on our left. We were joking around, talking about fireworks and plans for the night when we both froze. Something was moving up ahead. It wasn't a deer or a stray dog. This was a shadowy figure, about 6 feet tall, sprinting away from us at an inhuman speed. It had no facial features, no discernible clothing, just a dark, blurry silhouette that almost seemed to glide over the ground. We stood there, stunned. What the hell was that? Caleb whispered, gripping my arm. "I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Crackhead," I suggested, though my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. Orrville had its fair share of weirdos, but this was something else. We tried to laugh it off and kept walking, though both of us kept glancing over our shoulders the rest of the way. A few nights later, I decided to take the shortcut on my own. It was late, probably 10 or 11 p.m., and the train yard felt unusually quiet. As I walked, I kept my head down, scrolling through my phone to distract myself. That's when I saw it again. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. I turned to my right and saw the same blurry, shadowy figure barreling toward me at full speed. It didn't make a sound, no footsteps, no rustling leaves, but I could feel its presence, an overwhelming sense of dread that made my stomach drop. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my ears, until I reached the streetlights at the edge of the shortcut. When I finally stopped and looked back, the forest was still and silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I saw. A few days later, Caleb and I decided to test our luck again. We wanted to prove to ourselves that it was just our imagination, that the figure wasn't real. But as soon as we stepped into the shortcut, we felt it, the suffocating sensation of being watched. Neither of us said anything at first, but we started walking faster. The deeper we went, the stronger the feeling grew, like unseen eyes were following our every move. By the time we reached the edge of the forest, we were sprinting, our breaths fogging up in the cool night air. Then it happened. A blood-curdling scream erupted from the trees behind us. A guttural, inhuman wail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It didn't sound like an animal, or even like a person. It sounded angry, furious, almost like it was enraged that we'd escaped. When we finally made it to the courts, we collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. What the hell was that? Caleb panted, his face pale. I don't know, man, I said, shaking. But I'm not walking through there alone again. The next night, I told my friend Sarah and her cousin Jess about what had happened. They didn't believe me. You're just trying to scare us, Jess said, rolling her eyes. Fine, I said. Let's go. Tonight. I'll prove it to you. So around 2 a.m., the four of us set off for the shortcut. The air was still, and the train yard was eerily quiet. As soon as we reached the edge of the forest, Jess stopped in her tracks. Tears were streaming down her face. What's wrong? Sarah asked, grabbing her hand. I don't know, Jess stammered, her voice trembling. I just feel like something's watching us. I nodded. That's what I've been saying. It's like the forest is alive or something. We stood there for what felt like hours, staring into the dark expanse of trees. I could have sworn I saw the shadowy figure again, pacing back and forth just beyond the tree line. None of us dared to step closer. The final encounter happened about a week later. Caleb and I were walking through the train yard at night, using our phone flashlights to see. We'd barely turned them on when a cop car rolled up out of nowhere. 2 officers got out, telling us we weren't allowed to be there and that we needed to find another route home. Your flashlights gave you away, one of them said. But here's the thing. We'd only had our flashlights on for 2 seconds before they showed up. There's no way anyone could have called them that quickly. As we walked away, I glanced back. The cops were still there, standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees with the same look of dread we'd felt. They know, Caleb whispered. Yeah, I said. They definitely know something. I don't know what's out there in the Trainyard forest. A ghost? A demon? Something else entirely? All I know is that it's not friendly. I've stopped taking the shortcut, and I warn anyone who mentions it to stay far away. But sometimes late at night, I find myself wondering, what would have happened if I hadn't run? Would I still be here to tell the story?